yes, let's talk about Jasmy. This is our Jasmy segment of the night, and it comes straight from NeoX Tricks. And you guys have known that I have posted more than enough info when it comes to one of the key players that's part of the Jasmy team, and that is Tadashi Morita. When you look more into Tadashi's uh, background, it is so impressive. Like what Menalogwar has stated when it comes to Morita, these guys that are part of this industry literally bow to Morita. He's like, the cream of the crop when it comes to um, everything he brings to not just DC microgrid technology, but like all the robust technologies that he's developed over 30, 40 years. It's crazy when you look into his background. But especially when it comes to the patents that he contributes consistently, even right now, right? He has some pending patents when it comes to what he brings to IoT. So NeoX Tricks has a few things we're going to highlight tonight. And again, please give him a follow at Bana A17. He talks about the potential benefits of integrating micro DC or microgrid DC technology. Now, I've done, of course, at least a couple different segments in regards to this, and I want to elaborate a little bit more about this and how much it's going to mean to you as obviously a Jasmy investor. The key thing is the bigger picture of things. So before we get more into tonight's outline in regards to Jasmy, your key takeaway should be the final goal, right? Society 5.0 and why this is such a big, huge deal. So Morita, the inventions, the whole thing about Jasmy, and how we're making things more efficient, especially when it comes to that microgrid DC technology. It states basically that while blockchain could be used to track energy transactions in real time and would provide increased security and transparency, Jasmy has this whole thing of integrating all this into, I guess you could say, two main technologies, in which basically Jasmy would be more efficient, secure, and decentralized. So jumping into the next page of what we have, it is these key findings in regards to these highlights of Tadashi Morita. Now, like NeoX Trick says, Morita, who is CSO Jasmy, DC Microgrid, he is still currently developing an inverter that could improve the flexibility and quality of microgrids. Now, when I get more into this with you guys, I'm going to show some other findings that I have that I want to share with you in regards to why that's so significant. But in regards to the inverter, this is actually called the GPI, and this could basically allow microgrids to operate independently of the main power grid. So even here in the United States, we understand how power grids work. What about having better power grids? We talk about power consumption, even here in the Phoenix area, right? I live down the street from ASU West, literally down the street from ASU West, Arizona State University West. And all over the campus is solar panels all over the place, right? Why do they do that? Because it's a lot more efficient compared to the old traditional power consumption grid that we have, which still exists in most of the state. But again, entering into this new era of these power grids and understanding that it's not only a case of, less cost, right? But being more efficient. And how about this for size? How we always talk about scalability in your blockchain and DLT. How about scalability when it comes to power and the consumption and how it's used and how it's delegated and all that stuff? So, like NeoX Tricks says, this technology will allow microgrids to provide energy to isolated areas or contribute to the stability of the electricity grid. Now, I'm going to blow this up for you guys, and when I do this, I'm going to blow it up as much as I can to put some emphasis on this. So let's go ahead and share this. Here it is. You do see Morita here, right? Who is he? Sony Computer Sciences Laboratories, right? You understand he's a big, big player. Come out of the frame for a moment. And he goes on to mention this on the right side in regards to like some of the patents and some of his research. But basically speaking, your key takeaway should be this right here, plain as day. Morita, According to his specific research, he talks about that there's interest to free the microgrids connected to the power supply system from the frequency droop system and build flexible, high-quality microgrid clusters. As a means of doing so, he's developing a grid partitioning inverter, GPI, that maintains power quality locally without the need for inertia in the grid. GPI frees you from the shackles of power balance with a wide range of single power systems. Here's the thing, right? Look at all the things that are tagged here: authentication, parallel and distributed computer technology, security, information security, cryptography, encryption, data security, IT security, wireless security, computer security. I don't know about you, but if I'm investing in something like Jasmy or other cryptocurrencies and so on, I like the idea of somebody like Merida. And the reason why I state that is, don't you like the idea that every single member of this team brings something towards the greater goal of things? You know how impressive that is? That's beyond impressive, right? This is why we're always going to talk about Merida whenever we get an opportunity to do so. Getting more into what Mr. NeoXTrix has, and then getting into what I have, I want to share this also with you. Let's put this over on the right side. How many citations does he have referenced in regards to this technology? Well, since 2017, he has 99 different citations that reference all this. And as we know, he also has many different patents, right? It's not just Kazumasa Sato. That's impressive in itself, is it not? But getting more into what we have for you guys tonight, I want to share a few more things in regards to the findings. And I think this is a great comment from Forza Leche, aka Simon Greco. He says, you know, what's important here is not only data democracy, but now having the power. What about changing the power as we know it? What am I talking about? Well, I'm going to share some key notes that I have with you guys tonight. So for one, in my notes, what is the difference, if you're asking, in regards to all this technology? Great question, right? Before we get into that, there's a few different types of microgrids, and you may not even, even think about it. Maybe you think of like solar, maybe you think of like, what you grew up with, right? Whether you're part of Gen X or Gen Y or Z or whatever the heck the case be. There's different types of technologies, especially when it comes to microgrids. So for one, there's the advanced microgrid. There's a campus style microgrid, hence why I gave that example about Arizona State University. There's community microgrids. There's grid connected microgrids. There's hybrid models. There's remote models. So there's all sorts of different ones. But what is the difference between a smart grid and just that, a microgrid? And that's a very, very good question. So let's get into it. The main difference between the two can be found in just that, the communication of how or where that power goes. In a microgrid, the components within the grid communicate with each other. In a smart grid, the components are connected to each other and to the energy trading platforms on the internet. Getting more into this, how many microgrids, for instance, are here in the United States? That's a great question. Microgrids, for instance, provide a tiny fraction of the United States' electricity. You got to keep in mind, it's a big deal to spend extra money to invest into what? Our infrastructure, especially here all over the United States. I mean, it's not free, it's an investment. It doesn't help any that we're in multi-trillion dollars worth of debt. What, 33 trillion, 34, 35? It's a lot of money. But at the start of 2023, the United States, listen to this, has 692 microgrids. And they're installed with a total capacity of nearly 4.4 gigawatts. More than 212 of those are with the capacity of more than 419 MW, and some of those, of course, have come online the last 4 years. So, getting into more of the research, I'm going to give you an example of California. Now, some of you guys are going to stop me right there, but let's not make this political. Here from this particular one that was cited back in April 19th, 2021, talks about the resiliency and microgrids that work together in this group and the multi-property tariff phase, member proposals, and GPI, again, like what we're talking about in regards to Morita and MRC. And it goes on to mention some of the key things here, and that basically is what I'm about to share with you right here. So one of the key things is, the market for this. Is there really a market for it? And if so, how is this going to benefit, like, for instance, our nation? Great question. So there's, energy consumption can save money, but also takes an investment. Is that investment worth more than what we're going to save? Well, GPI, like we talked about before, bases its policy recommendations on promoting technology learning curves. And of course, this is part of their theory of this change that's going to happen. They see many fields that are predictable in regards to relationships between increased scale, because remember I talked about that before, and declining costs, which again lead to increased scale and further cost declines in a virtuous cycle of ongoing improvements. On this example on the far right, which is cited from Earth Policy Institute and also Bloomberg, once again, I always cite Bloomberg, talks about the price of a solar panel per watt. And on this particular one, I'll come out of the frame just to give you an idea of how this all comes together. You will see that the price of a solar panel per watt, because I live here in Phoenix, I think this is a good example, that back in 1975 was only 2 megawatts, right? And we, of course, have increased, substantially since then. Global solar panel installations, for instance, back in 2015, states it was 61 cents. And of course, you see how this is broken down. But solar panel installations lead to price declines that lead to higher installations. And of course, that leads to more of an investment. In regards to microgrids, they're still quite expensive because of unique components and novelty. As you can see right here, microgrids can benefit from increased scale and cost, and that declines since they are still quite expensive. The MMAT proposal is meant to quickly ramp up microgrids to scale and promote significant cost declines. Of course, they have a model here. But when microgrids are significantly cheaper, they will become a more readily available option for all types of communities. And without getting more into this, my point I want to share to you is this. I'll come back out of the frame. This is a proposal that's being shared, right, that dates back to 2021 for California. Why would California want to invest in some type of solution like this? Well, think about it. It's a no-brainer. The whole key thing basically is that California still ranks the highest in the United States when it comes to population. More people require more energy consumption. Duh, no kidding. But when you have technology that's introduced where it ends up being a game changer, what can that do for society? What can that do for people? Well, as the saying goes, 1 + 1 = 2. But the key thing is this: if you allow people to have more money to save that money, because they're not spending on, for instance, energy consumption or having a big power bill and so on. It's a win-win not only for the state, but this whole new thing that we're entering into. Less carbon being burned, you name it. Less energy consumption, more money to do things with, more people who have money to do things with. So it's a win-win all around. So again, I showed that example that was cited from there. Now again, back to what Morita has, I think that's a big deal, because you got to keep in mind that this whole end goal for Society 5.0 is a big deal. For this guy to have these custom patents, right, and connected to Jasmy and understanding the bigger picture of things, I think is a huge, big deal. Smart cities need to operate in a smart way. I mean, it's just as simple as that. And that also means less power consumption. Now enter in Morita, who has a solution to all this, with unique patents. And again, you can understand how undervalued your particular asset of Jasmy is when you look at the greater picture of things. If you look at the current picture of things, where you say to yourself, my God, this Jasmy thing's not doing much, then you don't understand the greater picture of things. And if anything, you give into fear, you start getting doubt, and you say to yourself, the chart is not doing much. But in reality, it's not Jasmy or any of this stuff. For me, the way I look at it, what I have and what I hold is a long-term investment. Even Warren Buffett, who claims he's not a big crypto fan, has stated that if you're not willing to invest in anything for 10 years, then you're not even, you shouldn't even be invested into anything. Now, he's referencing the stock market. We do know with crypto, it's a whole different ball game, right? And I myself can legitimately say that if it wasn't for the 2021 bull market or the end of that, I wouldn't even be here with you guys right now, right? My story of turning 10K into 120K. I personally invested quite a bit in regards to Jasmy. So my thing is, I want to bet on a winner. I want to bet on people that understand innovation and basically are part of the end goal of this thing of the Society 5.0 in Japan and other areas of the world. I think it's a big, huge deal, but I want to get more into why this is a big, huge deal. So with more of my gatherings, I want to share this with you. And of course, this is in regards back to the whole topic of DC grids. So here it is. Let's share this. DC grids, because we're talking about Morita. And it goes on to mention this right here. The massive expansion of renewable energy sources. And I know this is not big enough, but this, if I make it bigger, it just doesn't look right. But it states that, that massive expansion of renewable energy sources will involve a wealth. Think about that for a moment. Wealth. A change in electrical energy supply. An important aspect arises out of the transition from a centralized to a highly decentralized supply system. This is something out of the norm that we don't normally cover here at Maximus Crypto, but I decided to get more into this. For reducing system costs and achieving highest efficiency in providing electrical energy, DC-based systems and grids will play key roles in the future. Think about the future. Smart cities, Society 5.0. You may never see these concepts here in the United States. But again, think about different cultures of the world where, East meets West. Will it ever meet? Not really. But just because you don't agree on the technology or the culture doesn't mean it won't be used on the opposite side of the world. This is due to the intrinsic DC characteristics of the main elements, like photovoltaic generators and electrical energy storages, and the elimination of many inefficient DC to AC and AC to DC conversion steps in the case of direct supply of the large number of electronic loads. Again, those electronic loads, can you come up with a way in which the electricity can be delegated in a more faster, sufficient, and cost-effective ways? Again, enter in some of Tadashi Morita's examples. So here's a guy standing in front of something that you kind of seen to a sense, like even it doesn't say Tesla, but you've seen Tesla use similar technologies. So here's an example of a DC grid, and I thought I would share this with you guys just to kind of help with the outline. So local and decentralized controlled DC grids offer many advantages compared to the conventional public AC grid. Here's this guy who's Bernd Vender, who is a group manager DC grids. He gives an introduction to their various DC activities. And on this particular one, this is 2 minutes. I thought I'd give you a visualization from somebody that's part of this industry. If you appreciate the content and why we're sharing it, please smash that like. Make sure you're subbed and hit that bell notification. Here we go.
Hallo, ich bin Bernd Wunder und beschäftige mich am Fraunhofer ISB mit Gleichstromnetzen. Das heutige Stromversorgungsnetz basiert auf Wechselstrom. Mit dem Ausbau der erneuerbaren Energien kommen viele dezentrale Gleichstromquellen hinzu. Dadurch bedarf es vieler Wandlungsschritte. So entstehen Verluste und das Netz wird anfällig für Störungen.
Wir haben selbst ein großes Gleichstromnetz aufgebaut und viele moderne Speicherkonzepte eingebunden.
Unsere Lösung sind also lokale und dezentral gesteuerte Gleichstromnetze. Diese sind direkt am klassischen Versorgungsnetz angeschlossen und können jederzeit unabhängig funktionieren. In Produktionsumgebungen kann die Rückspeiseenergie aus den Maschinenantrieben direkt genutzt werden. Bei gleicher Leistung können wir die Hälfte an Kupfer einsparen und erhöhen gleichzeitig den Wirkungsgrad. Besonders in der Industrie und in Rechenzentren entstehen wirtschaftliche Vorteile. Durch die Mitarbeit in anerkannten Standardisierungsgremien bringen wir unsere Erfahrungen und unser Wissen in internationale Normung ein. So können auch andere die Vorteile von Gleichstrom nutzen. Wir sparen CO2 ein durch höhere Effizienz mit weniger Materialressourcen. Auch im flexiblen Büroumfeld werden die Vorteile sichtbar.
Aufgrund unserer Erfahrungen sind wir der geeignete Partner, wenn es um Leistungselektronik, Schutztechnik, Netzanalyse und Stabilität von Gleichstromanwendungen geht. Gerne bringen wir unsere Expertise für Ihre Herausforderung bei der Energiewende ein und freuen uns auf spannende Projekte.
All right, yeah, it's all in German, but we have subtitles for you, and I wanted to give you guys that example. Let me share just a tad bit more in regards to that. And here we go. So let's just close out a couple things real quick. All right. So I want to state this real quick, and this is another one from this, and then we'll kick it into a little bit more of what we have. It's this real, yeah, my bad. Here we go. It's this: DC grids with bidirectional charging technology for electronic vehicles, or electric vehicles, excuse me. We did that piece a while back, only a few days ago, in regards to Sony, and also, for instance, the Honda joint venture. Pretty cool stuff. This is a great example. So for one, we know what T.Morita'S is developing, some of these patents and so on, in regards to DC microgrid technology. DC grids with bidirectional charging technology for electric vehicles. States, for instance, that you have this example of comprehensive energy infrastructure that supports the efficient integration of sustainable energy sources and how it facilitates it to the further development of electromobility. They have solutions in regards to the old model to the new model, where we're going. But for instance, in an e-mobi grid, the DC grids group of the IISB is developing a particularly flexible insulating DC to DC converter. And with that said, it's going to allow for this ultra wide voltage range. It's a converter that specifically is optimized for bidirectional DC charging. This means that in addition to passenger cars, commercial vehicles can also be charged and discharged. Bidirectional charging allows the batteries of electric vehicles to be used and intermediate storage in the DC grid. In this way, they buffer the overproduction of renewable energies. Think about that for a second. That's game changer tech. The bidirectional charging technology is therefore particularly important for grid stability when the energy supply fluctuates. So even jumping back to what we have earlier in regards to what Mr. NeoX Tricks was talking about, you got to keep in mind that Morita's invention into the Jasmy blockchain is what is going to allow this all to be more efficient. Hence why he has his exclusive patents. And like it also mentions that while the blockchain could be used to track energy transactions in real time, again, think about this, Jasmy's utility, another layer, this will provide increased security and transparency. Now, this integration of these two techs could allow Jasmy to be more efficient, secure, and decentralized. So from beginning to end, your key takeaway should be Jasmy not only promotes data democracy, but actually helps get that done. And then at the same time, we're looking at, the concepts of, for instance, data, the decentralization of data, as in, decentralized data marketplaces, right? Disturbing the industries that are centralized, your Googles, your Facebooks, your Apples, your Amazons. So all these different examples, I think, is absolutely awesome, right? And we, of course, share most of this with you tonight. Getting more into this, I want to show you guys just a few more key things in regards to driving factors of the DC microgrid development. And on this particular one, it comes from a publication called Microgrid Knowledge. So let's just jump into this for a bit. So on this, you see that DC microgrids, of course, are going mainstream. I mean, guys, it's the next big jump for scalable energy. It's a scalable energy solution that is going to save us all money in the long run. This was posted originally on May 10th of this year, so it's still somewhat new. And I'm just going to jump down to this part where it talks about the driving factors. So again, several factors driving the increased momentum in DC microgrid adoption and deployment. First and foremost is how the market forces are creating demand. And again, we're always talking about supply and demand for the clean, resilient, and dispatchable power renewables-based DC microgrids and what they provide. Okay, there's enable factors that are going to speed the rotation and the adoption today of this technology. Getting further down into this, it talks about the balance in this article in regards to the legislative environment, the technological advancements, and the standards development. Remember how we talked about standards earlier? So what kind of market demand is there for this tech? This is why I'm sharing it with you. So basically speaking, first and foremost, the growth of renewables-based DC microgrids is driven by energy consumers' need and desire to have clean electric power that can be delivered continuously regardless of the state of the broader utility grid or the weather. Even in advanced economies, even like the United States, our already overtaxed power distribution grid is under great strain with the electrification of anything and everything, I should say. A situation only made more difficult by the challenges presented, of course, by climate change. Today, the cleanest, most readily available and cost-effective source of electricity of electric generation is solar. That's why I gave you the examples earlier, right? Because I live in Phoenix and it seems like everybody's doing the whole solar thing. But in regards to DC, we understand that, we have this thing in which you can use a source of DC and you can load the, DC. Again, that example we gave about 2 minutes ago. And how we're going to allow this at the same time have this crowded grid of using less capacity for all this energy, and how there's large points of distributed AC grids for interconnection. We talk about quant with interoperability. You got to think about the power grid for interconnection. This last part, pairing solar and storage along with other localized DC sources like fuel cells and DC loads like EVs behind a single point of grid interconnection allows, for instance, an inverter. And again, there's your juicy part. Because at the very beginning of the outline, what did we talk about? Let me backtrack to it. We talk about, for instance, Mr. Morita and how he is creating this whole thing about this inverter. It's on this page, actually. Look what it says, guys. Don't you love how I tie this all in? T.Morita', CSO of Jasmy, DC microgrid, developing what? An inverter that could improve the flexibility and quality of microgrids. This inverter, called GPI, could allow microgrids to operate independently of the main power grid. I just don't understand how people are not realizing the greater, bigger impact of Jasmy and what they're trying to do and the things that they're connected to and so on. And I know on the surface, like some people stated, and maybe I think it was the comment from Dingy, what are they connected, or what are they creating? You have to keep in mind it's them enabling some of the utility that's connected to the overall bigger scheme of things. You have inventors creating technology, right? Morita is literally your answer. He is your plug. He is your connect. This part right here, the work of all this is evolving rapidly. Enter into Morita and what he's bringing to the table with his patents. And again, the contribution to the increased momentum in the, this example here, I'm not going to get into that, but I mean, it breaks all sorts of things down of how it's all, being more efficient, if you will. I'm not going to get into this legislative environment, but there's so much stuff you can get into when it comes to nerding it out. Talks about the evolution of this technology, right? Innovation. But in closing, I want to share this with you guys, right? And basically on my own notes, microgrids, how they basically come in all shapes and sizes. Basically, some can be measured on kilowatt scale. Others can be measured on megawatt scale. Some include storage and some do not. But regards to the United States, because some people want that example real quick, and rightfully so. Were you aware that the United States Department of Energy defines a microgrid as a group of interconnected loads and distributed energy resources within clear, defined electrical boundaries that acts as a single controllable entity with respect to a grid? Now, in regards to microgrid, you can connect and disconnect from the grid, enable it to operate in both grid connected or even island mode. I know some people say, well, is that because of Japan? Well, you can throw that in there, right? It is an island country. But in other words, a localized source where energy is both generated and consumed, independent of the larger energy grid. A microgrid, listen to this, a microgrid can be as small as a single residence. That's big, right? Because now you can visualize the significance of these comparisons. So yes, a single residence like my house, to a commercial building, all the way up to entire industrial park or even entire community or municipality. What about when we use the technology to power on smart cities? All right, closing notes. I'm done with you, Max. Give me all the nerd talk. Can you just tell me how much this is all going to be worth? Well, absolutely. All right. I try to answer all the questions as much as I can. So how much will this be worth, for instance, because some of you guys are like, some big things will happen in 2026, right? So been there, done that, right? Jasmy team says they want to get to the $17 KPI goals. So let's talk about 2027. Let's just make that as an example. How much will DC microgrid technology be worth by 2027? The DC microgrid technology market is estimated to reach in US dollar amount. And again, this is just an estimate. $20.5 billion by 2027, growing at a compound annual growth rate, which is CAGR, of 18.6% during the forecasted period. And want to know something? That is only, roughly 4 years from now? I don't know about you, but if you're going to earn 18.6% on a compound annual growth rate on any of your particular investments, you're doing good, all right? Especially in that time frame. Now, back to this whole topic of DC microgrids, just real quick before we close out our Jasmy coverage for tonight. DC microgrids offer a number of advantages over traditional AC microgrids. And again, just kind of catching you up, just in case you forgot. So here's a quick summary. 3 key things. Higher efficiency. So for one, DC microgrids can operate at higher efficiencies than AC microgrids that we're currently used to. And this is due to the reduced need for conversion between just that, the AC and DC power. Number 2, improve reliability. DC microgrids are less susceptible to blackouts. And I like this statement because when I hear, Mr. Klaus Schwab's, and, he's like, there could be a cyber attack and it could be absolute, you don't talk Russian, there could be a cyber attack and everything could go down, and you'll be eating at the Wiener Schnitzel and eating, sauerkraut for the rest of your life and you'll be happy. No, I am not going to be happy with that. But what I am going to be happy with is guys like Tadashi Morita, who is trying to contribute towards making things more efficient. And I'm invested in a particular token that has to do with a guy who has a vision of getting things more efficient. That sounds cool. So one more time, DC microgrids are less susceptible to blackouts. and other power outages than the AC microgrids. Cool. That sounds great. How about lower costs? DC microgrids, again, this is the third point, can be less expensive to build and operate than, of course, the traditional model of AC microgrids. Now, of course, there's challenges in regards to this, but there's also advantages. And here is the 4 key advantages that you want to pay attention before, again, we close this out. I know I keep saying that. So for one, we got to get that adoption. And there's advantage to driving this adoption of DC microgrids in a variety of applications, including commercial industrial buildings. We gave that example earlier. How about hospitals? You know, my poor dad's been to the hospital 11 to 12 times within the last 12 months. My God, right? But hospitals and other critical infrastructure facilities can benefit from this. You better believe it, right? We talk about blackouts. We don't want a case where our loved ones or my dad or your parents or whoever, even you, we have a blackout. Now we understand there's backup generators, but how long is that going to last, right? So again, this is a solution to even that. How about remote communities, right? So the growth of DC microgrid technology market is also being supported by a number of government initiatives. So it's not just Japan, you get the United States now on board, hence why they're introducing it in California. For example, the United States Department of Energy has launched a number of programs to support the development and deployment of DC microgrids. Overall, DC microgrid technology market is expected to experience significant growth in the coming years due to its increased demand for reliable, cost-effective microgrid solutions. Duh, no kidding, right? All right. This last part is good because I know I said the last part's the last part. I'm so sorry. How huge will DC microgrid technology be in Japan in the upcoming years for Society 5.0? So you're a Jasmy holder. We're always talking about Society 5.0. So for one, you have to keep in mind there's a Japanese government initiative to create a super smart society. Yes, true. That is highly digitalized and interconnected. DC microgrids can help achieve this vision by providing a more efficient and reliable way to do just that, manage energy and distribute, right? There's many factors in regards to how Japan and other countries benefit from it. But one thing you got to keep in mind and take away from this is renewable energy deployment and how DC microgrids are well suited for integrating that renewable energy sources to allocating it all in a more more efficient way. Okay. So number 2, Japan is facing a number of challenges, of course, relating to aging. We understand that, like I think they rank number 1 in the world is as far as not reproducing more Japanese people, citizens, and so on, right? It's a bad thing, but they got to tackle it. So DC microgrids can help improve the resilience and reliability of not just power grid, but also they're going to help the Japanese government in providing strong support for the development of DC microgrids. And according to this report, in the Japanese market alone, DC microgrids are expected to grow from $100 million in today's market, 2023, to $180 million, of course, by 2027. That's just in Japan. We gave the example earlier about, basically some other areas of the world, right? This represents a compound annual growth rate just for Japan alone of 15%. So you can understand already where Japan really benefits from this, right? That's just Japan. That's big. All right, back to Japan real quick. The growth of DC microgrids in Japan will be driven by the number of applications, including, and listen to this part, residential commercial buildings, industry, and remote communities. I'll talk about the part about remote communities just for a brief moment. DC microgrids can be used to provide electricity to remote communities that are not connected to the main power grid. So when we talk about, for instance, like stellar area, giving the unaccessed access or quant with, LAC chain for Latin America. What about literally having power to these communities, these little island areas or villages and so on? They just simply don't have power, period. Yeah, an interconnected world. And it's going to help the quality of life of these residents in the communities. And last but not least, DC microgrid tech is expected to play a major role in Japan's Society 5.0. DC microgrids can help create more efficient, reliable, and of course, just that sustainable energy system. But you have Tadashi Morita, who's a key proponent, who realizes the greater picture of things, and he's well connected big time to all this. Why am I not stacking more Jasmy? I already have. Why aren't you? It's not financial advice, but the way I look at it, very undervalued asset. And when you take more of the deeper dive into some of these industry players and realize what it's tied to me, it's a no-brainer. Some people, of course, are going to FUD it, but the way I look at it, I've done more enough research to understand the greater picture of things instead of looking at a daily chart and getting depressed about the whole thing. I'm looking at that chart and saying to myself, I will buy on other people's fear and I will hold this for a few years to reach some of these goals when we get into the utility run. So with that said, this concludes our coverage tonight on Jasmy. Let me know what you think in regards to the coverage. I think it's an absolutely big, huge deal. Morita, a big, big deal in his own right.